Is this really where you want to spend the rest of your life?
You know I don't.
Then this is our only ticket out of here.
Are you sure you want to do this?
Welcome back to the channel, everyone, where we love talking about movies and more. I'm your host, Mason Phillips, and today I've got a movie review for you for Alien Romulus, the new movie in the Alien franchise directed by Fede Alvarez. Before I get any further in this review, I want to ask you guys to hit that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you get notified when new videos go live on this channel. When you guys do that, I always appreciate it. Now, before we get any further in this review, let's talk about the plot. Space colonizers come face to face with the most terrifying life form in the universe while scavenging the deep ends of a derelict space station. Alright, so what was good about Alien Romulus? Well, if you've watched anything previously on this channel, I did a review for the original 1979 movie Alien just a couple days ago. You can check that video out. That was my first experience with this franchise. I'd never seen an Alien movie before. Me not being a big fan of the horror genre, it's been one of those that I've kind of kept at arm's length. With the release of Alien Romulus, I felt, why don't I go ahead and give this franchise a chance? And I'm so glad I did. I love that original film. Thought I could get caught up with the entire series, but I also did some research and found out Alien Romulus takes place between Alien and Aliens. Having not seen any of the other movies and only seen the original, this was actually the perfect place for me to continue this series, going from Alien and then jumping into Alien Romulus. And I gotta say, I really enjoyed this movie. It does a lot of great callbacks to the original film, definitely plays in the same ballpark. Fede Alvarez picked up on a lot of the same stuff that Ridley Scott established in the suspense and the horror, the setting, the tone, continues a lot of that going into this movie. This movie really feels like the true successor to the original movie. Having not seen any other movies in this series, this one really picks up really perfectly after the events of the first movie. It does make some callbacks and nods to that original film. I didn't feel lost not having seen Prometheus or any of the other movies in the franchise. Being a movie fan, I've already heard about a lot of stuff in pop culture surrounding the Alien series, so anytime there was a few other callbacks to the other movies in the series I hadn't seen, I still picked up on that kind of stuff. But I think if you're going into this movie and you haven't seen any of the other Alien movies, honestly, you really don't need to have seen any other Alien movie to understand what's going on in this movie, but I do recommend you at least watch the original 1979 film. I think you'll get so much more out of this movie if you watch that movie at the very least. Fede Alvarez just picks up on a lot of that same tone and suspense that was established by Ridley Scott. He seems to be a true fan of this genre and a true fan of this series. I know him to be a big fan of the horror genre. He directed the Evil Dead movie that came out, I think it was last year, maybe a year or so ago. He directed that movie, and then he went on to direct this movie, Alien Romulus. I think he loves to play in this ballpark, in this genre, dipping into the sci-fi elements, but still playing in the horror genre. It really works for him. He's perfect for this kind of film. He's perfect for this kind of story. I thought he did a great job with this movie. It's really like he picked up the baton from Ridley Scott. It really feels like a direct follow-up to that movie. Another thing that was really good about this movie was that it does definitely pay homage to the previous film, and it pays homage to this series. All the great elements, the stuff that we know about the Alien series, the xenomorphs, the facehuggers, these people that are really just trying to make a life for themselves. These guys aren't astronauts. They're not out trying to explore and go discover a new frontier. No, they're miners. They're going out in the mining colony trying to make money, free themselves out of any kind of servitude that they may have found themselves in. These are the working class people that we follow, the crew that we followed on the Nostromo in the first movie. It's the same type of crew that we follow here in Alien Romulus. picking up on all those same elements. It's the everyman that is put in this extraordinary circumstance. I love those kind of stories where it's the person that is so unfit, so unsuited for this kind of story and this kind of environment, have so much thrust upon them that they have no choice but to take everything that they had learned and use that in this extreme circumstance to become the hero at the end of the day. I love these kind of stories, and that's the same kind of story that we get here. Kaylee Spaney is great as Rain. She's definitely the surrogate character, filling in the spot of Sigourney Weaver's Ripley from the first film. She definitely takes on that same kind of role, a little different. You know, it's not exactly the same type of character, but still filling in that heroic lead character role. This movie pays so much great homage to what came before, but it also establishes a lot of cool and interesting new ideas in the Alien franchise. We get a lot more details on what was going on with the xenomorphs and what was going on with this corporation conglomerate who's been furthering the studies and the creation of the xenomorphs, this perfect organism, as Ash put it in the first movie, you know, trying to create something that could outstand humanity as maybe a possible replacement for humanity. Very interesting, the stuff that they set up in this movie. So many interesting elements that I thought really worked in the horror and the thriller genre. Again, not being a horror guy myself, but I got a few good scares out of this movie, just like I did in the first Alien movie. Now, I will say, for the most part, I don't think this movie gives you as great of scares as the first movie did, but there's still plenty of thrills and still plenty of excitement that comes in this movie. There was one point at the end, one big jump scare that just got me, and probably got me worse than anything that came in the original movie when I watched that, so I thought it did a great job there with the thrills, the scares. I thought it did really good with all the plot points that it was setting up and all the new elements. They're so cohesive and they work perfectly with the Alien franchise. That's new stuff that's introduced, but it doesn't crush anything that came before. It builds upon all the great stuff and continues to move that plot forward, so I appreciated all of that. I thought it was really cool, and all these really new aspects that are coming and setting up something really cool for where the franchise could be going in the future. Now I got to talk about our lead characters. Rain and Andy are two lead characters. Kaylee Spaney plays Rain. I remember her from the movie Civil War earlier this year, A24 Civil War. That was the first movie I saw her in, and so it's cool to see her in another big project, and I thought she did great in this movie. She really takes on more of the lead character role rather than a supporting character role, and she does really good in this. I loved her performance. I thought she was a perfect lead for this film, again, kind of filling in the role that Sigourney Weaver played in Ripley throughout the Alien series, so she's kind of taking up that mantle. I love the character of Andy. Andy is the surrogate brother to her. They work so well off of each other. They have great chemistry. David Johnson, who plays Andy, he does really great in this role. Loved his performance. They work so well off of each other. Definitely feel that kind of sibling-esque relationship. They were great characters to follow. Now I want to talk about the set design. I love the set design in the first movie. Now I will say I don't think the set design was quite as good in this movie as it was in Alien. However, in this movie we're coming from a slightly different environment. You know, we're coming from a mining colony versus this expedition search environment that we had in the first movie from the Nostromo crew. The beginning of the movie starts on a mining colony and then it jettisons out onto a big space station, and that's kind of where we stay with the rest of the film going forward. This movie has more of an industrial type feel to it rather than a full-on otherworldly sci-fi feel to it. This one just has a slightly different feel than the first one does. I like the design of the first one a little bit more, but this one is also designed great. I love the set design, the dark tones that are put throughout this. Again, these movies were made to be filmed in kind of darkness to kind of hide the extraterrestrial elements, where some things may not work. In the 70s and the 80s, those dark tones, that was more for the fact that you really couldn't have a lot of CGI work, so it was kind of there to hide the elements that didn't really work or look too great on camera and kind of keep that element of suspense and mystery. But now that's the tone and the look for the franchise, so Alien Romulus just continues with that look. It helps to build upon the suspense. And finally, this movie, it does set the series to go in a very interesting direction. The final act alone, I kind of touched on it a little bit, but the final act creates so much new stuff for this series, and I'm really curious where they might be taking that going forward. From what I understand, this is creating a lot of new stuff that the series can play with, and it's kind of disturbing. It's actually super disturbing what happens at the end of this movie, and if that's where they may continue taking the series going forward, I'm fascinated, I'm disturbed, I'm curious about where it may go. So I would put that in the good category. While it was disturbing watching what was happening on screen, I was really like, oh, all right, we're going in this direction. I don't know about this. I don't know if I want to watch this, but it's perfect in the tone and the setting of the Alien franchise. It works with all of the elements that are already established, creates really cool and interesting new rules. I'm curious and excited to see where this may go in the future. So what was mixed? Well, I've only got a couple things here. Overall, I really did enjoy the movie, but there are a few issues here that I wanted to address. Now, this movie, while it does pay homage to the original Alien, it also kind of feels like a straight-up cover of that movie. A really, really good cover, but a cover nonetheless. You know, it plays out in the same tone, the same beats, Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, and the extra Act 4 that a lot of these movies kind of get. You know, that surprising end of the movie's over, but not really. This movie kind of plays out in the same exact way. Beat for beat, I thought the plot felt very similar to the original Alien movie, and I was watching this thinking this was a fine movie, a good movie, but a movie that I feel like I had already seen before, still doing it pretty well, but again, something I had already seen before, so really wasn't bringing anything new to the series until we get to that final act. That final act is where it really pushes the series forward, and is really what put this movie over the top for me, and why I really came out of the theater liking this movie and thinking it did a really good job because of what the final act of the movie did, establishing something new and taking the series in a new and interesting direction. But for the most part, it's very similar to the original Alien movie, and I just wish it would have gone in a more original direction rather than relying on the same beats that were established in the first film. Now, the next thing I got in the mix section is this is going to be the one spoiler that I'm going to hit on in this movie. So, spoiler alert real quick. I want to warn you guys real quick. If you haven't seen Alien Romulus, go ahead and duck out real quick at this part and then join me after the spoiler section of this video. So right now I want to talk about the fact that they brought Ian Holm back, who played Ash in the first movie. Now, why this is a tricky situation is that Ian Holm unfortunately passed away in 2020. So it's one of those cases of we're resurrecting a dead actor to play a role that they had played previously. This happened in Rogue One when they brought back Tarkin with the likeness of Peter Cushing. He had already passed away in the 90s and they brought him back in a 2016 film. They did that again here with Ian Holm with the character of Rook. Now, I understand why they did this. It's the same android model and it's supposed to carry on the same tones of that first film, but I just don't think it was necessary. They could have easily gotten another android model. Andy is an android and he's not played by Ian Holm. He's a different model. Michael Fassbender was a different model in Prometheus and Alien Covenant, so they could have easily gotten a different actor that could have played this role. I just don't think it really works most of the time because a lot of it is due to the CGI that is used to bring his likeness in. CGI is very spotty. It doesn't really work half the time. Now, I will say with the voice, they used AI modulation, and that works because Rook is a robot. He is an android. So that does work with this character, but I don't think it was necessary to bring him back. I don't necessarily hate it, but it's not what I would have done. Now, what was bad with Alien Romulus? I've only got one thing I want to hit on, and that is the overuse of CGI rather than relying on practical effects. Since this movie takes place about 20 years after the events of the original Alien movie, I didn't think it was necessary to go heavy on the CGI. They could have gone more into those practical elements to create a lot of the effects with this film, again, using the lighting to their advantage, using the limitations to their advantage to create something that was a little bit more horrific, because I found the horror to play greater in the first movie, in the original movie, and while I still think it works really well in Alien Romulus, I don't think it hits quite as hard. So I would have leaned more into practical effects versus CGI. There are a few times when the CGI just doesn't quite work, doesn't quite land, and so I would have appreciated the effects to be a little bit more practical. Why I put this in the bad category is I think when you really notice the CGI, you really notice the CGI. It can be super noticeable and a little distracting at times. That's the biggest knock and the biggest negative I have for this movie. While for the most part it does work when there's a bright light shining on these visual effects, it really doesn't work, and I wish they would have leaned more practical rather than going heavy on the CGI. Final thoughts, I really like this movie. I definitely recommend you go see Alien Romulus in theaters. While there are a few little nitpicks I can have with this movie, at the end of the day, that final act sets up so many interesting elements that this movie series can go in the future. It pays a lot of great homage and calls back to that original 1979 Alien film. Fede Alvarez is definitely a big fan of this series and is definitely paying respect to the legacy of this series. And I love what he did with this movie, and I can't wait to see more from him in this series in the future, hoping that he'll come back for another movie down the line. I'm going to give this movie a rating. It's got to be a 4 out of 5 or a B+ on the letter scale. Not a perfect movie, but a really, really enjoyable movie. I would put it right under that original 1979 Alien movie. Haven't seen Alien, so I can't speak on that, but compared to the original 1979 film, it is definitely a great follow-up to that movie. If you've seen the movie, go ahead and go down in the comments. Let me know what your thoughts were on this film. Would love to hear from you. Remember to hit that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you get notified when when new videos go live on this channel. When you guys do that, it always helps me out, and I greatly appreciate it. Hope you all have an awesome and a fantastic day, and I'll see you in the next video.